Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm down in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Just watched Joe Biden speak for about 22 minutes, and my first reaction is that was a very kind of typical speech from a politician. He's talked for a long time, but when you really think about what he said, he didn't say that much. He spoke about values, kind of things that nobody could really argue with, except maybe Donald Trump. But I kept thinking of what Mondale asked Glib Gary Hart back in the day. Where's the beef? And it was interesting when he got started, he laid out four crises: the pandemic, the economic crisis, the racial justice uprising, and the climate crisis. And I said, yeah, okay, that's what I've been talking about. He didn't talk about the crisis of war and the new nuclear arms race, except to make some sort of militaristic, jingoistic statements toward the end. And then when he got to discussing those crises, he mostly described them, which, okay, but people already know what they are. The question is, what are you going to do about them? I remember when Reagan ran in 1980 against Jimmy Carter, he kept saying, I'm for full employment. Yeah, but how are you going to do it? We had just had in the 70s the defeat of the Humphrey Hawkins full employment bill. I mean, it passed, but they gutted it so much it wasn't a public jobs program. It wasn't a job guarantee. And here was Reagan like repeating that rhetoric, but he had no plan either, except really, tax cuts for the rich, and it's supposed to trickle down in the form of jobs for the rest of us, and it never does. So that's what I was thinking about is Biden went along. And so when he finally got around to saying what he'd do about the pandemic, he said, testing, medical supplies, federal government should provide the lead on that, fine. Information, yeah, follow the public health officials. Mandate masks, it's a good idea. But he didn't really seem to get it. What the other countries of the world have done to suppress the virus is they test and then they contact trace and quarantine those exposed and infected, so you can suppress community spread of the virus to the point where we can go back to work and to school safely. And he just didn't seem to get what we got to do, which maybe explains why he's been hiding in his basement instead of using the platform that he's got to point us in the direction we need and to put the pressure on the federal government. And, look at some of the other things come out of it. He didn't mention the post office, the destruction of the damn post office. Unless I missed it, he didn't even mention that. If he wants to describe a crisis, that's one that Donald Trump is totally responsible for. And where the hell is Joe Biden? So no doubt he couldn't be as bad as as Trump on the pandemic. Trump is a dummy. He's childlike. He make believes and just thinks if I say it enough times, it's going to happen. And meanwhile, tens of thousands of people are dying. But because Biden doesn't use his platform that he's got, he lives within commuter distance of the White House press corps. Like when he was U.S. Senator, he could go down there like Andrew Cuomo did in New York and get on cable television with socially distanced news conferences and demand and point the country and mobilize us on what we need from our government that Trump is not doing, and just mobilize a lot of pressure. He's got a platform for that, and he's wasting it. And in that sense, I say he's complicit in these tens of thousands of deaths because he's not using the power that he's got to make a difference. And if you don't do that, then you're complicit in the crimes going on. So, as I listen to him he's not particularly glib in the sense of being voluble. He's not a very good speaker, but he had the floor and he didn't provide the leadership there. And then when it got to the economic crisis, he talked about Build Back Better. That's their slogan. You look into the details and it's public side subsidies for private profits. They do have the start of a program for child care and elder care. I'll give them that. This country is so far behind the rest of the world on that. That's a low-hanging fruit. We got to go that way. Then he talked about empowering labor unions without saying how. You got to remember, this is the guy who was vice president after Barack Obama twice promised to do card check recognition of unions. the Employee Free Choice Act. They promised it in 2008, and then when it got to the Senate, they let it get diluted. Never got a vote on it. He promised again in 2012, oh, this time we're going to do it. And they dropped it like a hot potato after that election. I know my Teamsters Union, I'm not a particular fan of Jimmy Hoffa Jr., but he got double-crossed on that. All the labor movement did. So it's one thing to say you want to empower labor unions. How? Just like the question for Reagan on jobs was how. And he didn't say how. And then the climate, okay, you know, like I like to say, Trump says climate change is a hoax, but Biden and the Democrats are acting like it's a hoax. You look at what came out of that joint Sanders-Biden, you know, working groups on climate policy, and one of the few things they got any very concrete on was retrofitting homes for energy efficiency. They said, we're going to do 2 million homes in 5 years. Well, guess what? There are 100 million homes in this country. Do the math. We won't retrofit all these homes for energy efficiency at that rate for 300 years. And we're supposed to take this as a serious alternative to the, you know, Trump idiocy. It's not a serious program. We don't have the privilege of supporting people like Joe Biden that don't offer real solutions. And when it comes to the economic crisis, he didn't talk about basic economic rights. We have an economic bill of rights, a job guarantee, a guaranteed income above poverty, affordable housing. He didn't mention that. We got homelessness and we got tens of millions of people facing eviction. He didn't mention a housing program. We want Medicare for all. All he said is he's going to oppose Trump's effort to get rid of the pre-existing conditions part of the Affordable Care Act. Yeah, well, we want that, but right now we got 87 million people in this country, and it's growing now in this economic crisis, who are either uninsured or underinsured. So underinsured they don't go to the doctor unless it's a super emergency because they can't afford their insurance. You know, the copays and deductibles are too high, and their things not covered that they'll have to pay out of pocket. It's crap insurance. And that's what Joe Biden stands for, crappy insurance, if you're lucky enough to get it at all. So, climate justice. Okay, then he got to justice. And he stated the values nobody could argue with if they do believe in justice. Maybe Donald Trump doesn't, but most people do. But he had no policies. All he said is, I got Kamala Harris. And then he said no one was tougher on the banks. That's BS. One West in California, the staff of Kamala Harris, when she was Attorney General, found over 1,000. They're ready to go to court and charge Steve Mnuchin, who's now the Treasury Secretary, and his bank, One West, with over 1,000 violations of mortgage, foreclosure law and counts of mortgage fraud, because that bank was notorious in terms of predatory lending, predatory foreclosures, and even robo-signing, which was computerized fraud to steal people's homes. They had Mnuchin, and Kamala Harris declined to prosecute. And then a few years later, when she ran for U.S. Senate, Steve Mnuchin, corporate crook, racist, gave her $2,000 for her election. You know, Donald Trump gave her $6,000. Ivanka Trump gave her $2,000. When the elections are over, these people behind closed doors are not looking out after our interests. So that's breaking down the 4 crises he described, and he never did get to how are we going to end these wars. He said he'd be tough on dictators, fine. But what does that actually mean? You know, saber rattling is not necessarily the best way to deal with countries like big powers like Russia and China. We may not like the way they govern their countries. We may have concerns about human rights in those countries, but we also got to deal with them in terms of climate and in terms of this new nuclear arms race. which we started a modernization program when Biden was the vice president, that has destabilized the balance of terror. Now the Russians and the Chinese are modernizing their forces. We got strategic nukes that are 6 times faster than they were before, which means you don't launch when you think the other side launched and your detection, your radar says they're coming. You launch in anticipation the other side is getting ready to launch. It puts the hair trigger on even a more of a hair trigger. And then we're putting tactical nukes into conventional forces, more tactical nukes, with a crazy idea that we can escalate to de-escalate. In other words, in a conventional confrontation, we use tactical nukes to stop the other side who may be getting the upper hand, and then we want to de-escalate. And that's not going to happen, as Daniel Ellsberg pointed out in his second Pentagon Papers, a book called The Doomsday Machine. He was a nuclear war planner before he was a Vietnam War planner. And he documents in that book how once one nuke goes, they're all going to go. That's the doomsday machine. It's automated. We got one. The Russians got one. The Chinese had a policy of no first use, but they've dropped that now under the threat of this new nuclear arms race. So, of course, we're talking about peace initiatives, 75% cut in military spending, get out of these endless wars, pledge no first use, disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, and then go to the rest of the world and say we want to disarm the other nuclear powers and go there with world public opinion. 122 nations agreed 3 years ago to the text of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And when 50 ratified, it becomes law. They got 44 now. That's coming. And the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in this country knows that, because people like Joe Biden and all the political leadership in both parties, all the presidential candidates don't talk about it. And that's a life or death issue. That's a crisis that Biden didn't even mention. So I guess the question for socialists and progressives is, how are you going to vote against Trump? You're going to vote for this, statement of values without any substance by a politician who is funded by dark money? I was interviewed by, probably come out this week, by a publication wanting to know what I thought about Biden saying he's not going to unilaterally disarm by not taking dark money like Trump is. And I've said he could have made that a campaign issue. He could have said, my money's clean, Trump's is dirty. Instead, Biden says, I'm taking dirty money too. Both these politicians, both these major parties represent the corporate elite in this country. And until, we start voting for what we want, we're never going to get it. So the question is, how are you going to vote against Trump? You vote for Biden and you want Medicare for all? You want a real Green New Deal? He's against those things. You just voted against what you want. Everybody knows what the green ticket stands for. We do stand for Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and an economic Bill of Rights and peace initiatives to get us back from the brink of nuclear war. And if you want that, if you don't vote for it, you're certainly not going to get it from Biden. You vote for Biden, you get lost in the sauce. They don't know you want Medicare for all and a full-strength Green New Deal. You voted for Joe Biden, and he's against those things. So that's what I would say to people. You don't have to vote for Biden to vote against Trump. We'll fight Trump better than the Democrats do. The Democrats have a history of accommodating the right. They're not an effective way to fight the right. It was called triangulation by Bill Clinton. It was called trying to get at least one Republican to vote so you could call the bill bipartisan under Obama. And so, like in the economic recovery bill, it ended up mostly being tax breaks for the rich instead of public investment. So you can go right down the issues. And I don't want to go on too long. I've gone on, I'm not sure, about 10 or 15 minutes, almost as long as Biden. But hopefully I said something more of substance so people can think about how to best use their vote. That's your voice, and don't silence yourself by voting for what you don't want. So I hope everybody has a good evening, and I'm going to go eat something and try to relax, because I get mad when I hear that guy. I come back to the coronavirus crisis. Tens of thousands of people are dying. We'll have 250,000 dead by the election. That's what people say, the epidemiologists. And he's not using the power he has to get us on a program to stem that. And that is just inexcusable. So I think I'll stop right there and wish y'all a good evening and be safe out there. The virus is spreading like wildfire and a lot of people are getting sick and some are dying. So be careful out there. Have a good evening.